Okay, Mark, just going back to something you said earlier, you actually had some winning punters in your backstreet betting shop. Now, I think professional punters are quite rare on the ground and winning punters fairly rare. So how did they manage to beat you?
Well, look, we're talking, I think, primarily I'm thinking of about three people. Two of them basically were getting information, and they were getting good information. And I think in both cases it's because they knew people who were connected to big yards. So they were very selective. They'd come in, a normal bet, when they had a normal bet might have been a couple of quid, and then all of a sudden they want 50 on one, and it was always the same sort of yard, so it was easy to work out the connection. But the third guy was probably the guy who fascinated me most. He had his own rating system, and he used to work on handicaps. And a bit like, I suppose now, you look at the rating systems that the trade press and certain websites operate. But he was doing this with a piece of paper and a notebook, and we used to just come in and sit in our shop with his ratings on each race. And to be fair, amazing though it sounds, most people used to leave him alone. But I got interested in when you're back in handicappers, you have your losing runs, but he was always capable of striking back. And I realised over a period of time I wasn't beating him. I can't say he was beating me for fortunes. But I got fascinated in his approach, and that's probably what set me on a path to eventually doing some punting myself, a few years later.
When you went online with Sporting Bet, obviously every punter that does business with you, business is very transparent. All of a sudden, probably the first time ever in bookmaking that people really knew where they were. Did it come as a shock to you how many people who had previously been under the radar are actually quite hard to beat?
Oh, good question. No, some of them were trying to get on too much money, so they were relatively easy to spot. But I always do remember there was a chap that I was aware of who'd started to, he'd actually produced a computer program of ratings, and he was betting £20 at SP, and we didn't pick him up on the stake factoring. But as we were building the technologies were going along, as soon as we looked at return on capital, return on bets placed, we found him because he was top of the list. He was absolutely killing it, just £20 at SP. His systems were all based on SP, so he knew by backfitting techniques that was the other thing, of course. A lot of punters have to take a price to know they've locked in value. He didn't.
So did you ever get to the bottom of what he was actually doing?
Yeah.
Can you tell us?
No.
Okay, so moving swiftly on.
No. I still, I have punted a bit over the years, and I've used a variation on a theme actually of what he was doing. And I hope this isn't going to get me too many accounts closed, but I still do have the occasional bet or lay one or two on Betfair, and I use that same methodology. So I don't think any smart punter gives his intellectual property away, and I'm no different.
Okay, you mentioned this chap was having £20 bets on. It's a bit of a hot potato at the moment that a lot of normal punters sort of can't get that sort of stake on with online bookmakers. What was your restriction policy in those early days?
Well, our restriction policy in the early days was to look at the liability of the bet, so and the stake. So we let them have, up to 500 on an evens or an odds-on shot. We would let them bet to win 500, which might only be a tenner on a 50 to 1 shot. But bear in mind, we got these people down as knowing the time of day. Often when they're betting a 50 to 1 shot, there's probably some big value involved in that price. So that's how we did it initially. But then we moved to a much more sophisticated system in our back office of factoring, where we could factor stakes on customers, but we could also factor them on bet types and different sports as well.
So would you ever have used any of those as a live mark and sort of follow them in?
Yeah, we did. So the £20 punter never got banned. He never got restricted. We didn't really ban people, but yeah, we were factoring them. But no, he was brilliant. And we had an approach which was probably a little bit different to a lot of the UK bookmaking industry. There is a funny, I'll just tell you very quickly, there's a funny story attached to how I got the seed funding for the next round of money for Sporting Bet. So having put all my money in and realised I hadn't quite got enough, I had to go and seek third-party funding to get my way through. And I was talking to these venture capitalists, and it was the very final meeting when they were going to give me the decision, and it was all being done very civilly over lunch. And the main objection to going forward was, well, we've realised that in bookmaking there are professional punters who can take your bottom line away completely. In other words, they're going to beat you. You aren't going to beat them. And as luck would have it, just sheer luck, from my pre-early sporting bet days, I'd still kept a wad of letters from bookmakers banning me in my briefcase. So I pulled out this wad of letters and showed them the wad of letters. And the next question was, what percentage of the company do we get? So I was able to demonstrate that knowing that how to beat the market was also important in terms of when we briefed that functionality into our software developers to have a method of controlling the business.
So do you feel then that the bookmakers these days are very draconian, that they're sort of missing a trick really?
I do with some of them. I don't know if I should name the bookmaker, but a very well-known online bookmaker in the UK on Sunday refused to take a £25 bet from me, and in fact I was offered a maximum of a £5 each way online, which I thought was taking the mick a little bit, if I'm honest. As I say, I don't think I should name them, but they're also quite known in the sports TV world. Should we leave it at that?
If they watch this, you'll be lucky to get that on now, won't you?
Well, I will, but I mean, I think that was an insult, quite frankly. So, look, as a bookmaker, I think you should be obliged to take a leisure recreational stake, but you should not be obliged to bet somebody for thousands if you don't want to. So I think it's a case of proportion and balance in there, really.
When did it actually dawn on you? Did you wake up one morning and think, crumbs, I've gone from these 5 betting shops and I'm now this massive... Did it suddenly just dawn on you, or were you so business savvy that it just became natural?
There wasn't any one moment. It was a case of evolution, not revolution, really. So it was little steps along the way. Getting up and running and live when you're at the start of a dot-com boom in stock market terms. I suddenly thought, my God, we could sell this. And we did have a couple of approaches. But then in, when was it, 99, we listed on OFX, which was the junior stock market in London for early stage and growth companies. And I mean, gosh, we floated at 7p a share. Our offering was completely oversubscribed. We traded very quickly up to sort of 20p a share, and I could work out what my founder shares were worth at that time. But then I can remember going into the city and doing a series of presentations to investors on the back of results, and the share price sort of virtually tripled off the back of that. Now, you have to remember, this was in the environment of the internet boom, and we were suddenly an internet business that they could buy shares in that was actually making money, whereas a lot of them were talking about hits and eyeballs and page impressions and all these other fluffy things. Obviously, the gambling business, we were able to build something pretty quickly that made money.
That was the dot-com sort of period, as people
call it. That was the dot-com period, and that kept evolving to the point that we got onto AIM, the sort of the middle market, if you like, part of the London Stock Exchange. We raised 17 million in January 2001, and by that time the company had a market cap of a couple of £100 million times. So, to answer your question, there wasn't any one particular moment. It was evolution. It's not like winning the lottery. Suddenly you went from nothing to everything. And yeah, it was interesting times, but it was interesting to me in another sense that I could still see much more and bigger opportunity. In the same way that clearly, Denise Coates and Teddy Saggy did, I realised we were on the tip of something massive. So my interest wasn't sort of to worry too much about that, and I didn't sell shares in the early days, really. It was more a case of growing the business, getting the business stronger, getting into more markets, diversifying the risk within the business. That was my focus, really.
So more about being right than actually gaining money at the time?
Well, I think the one followed the other. So I think de-risking the business across multiple markets, I think, if I'm honest, we were probably driven by fear in those early days. I'm talking now, having just raised sort of 17 million quid on AIM in early 2001, we made some acquisitions as well, which put us into the Australian market, put us into the American market proper. We already had a small toehold in the American market and a couple of other European markets. And if I'm honest, I was fueled by the fear that the big UK high street bookmakers would come along and outmarket us. So we were just head down, growing quickly, organically as well as by acquisition, to be big enough and strong enough. Because we thought that when they did eventually wake up and realise the opportunity, and thank God it took them a few years, they'd just come along and outmarket us. And by the time they did realise, it was too late, we were too well established.